p.m. for Pressing Matters. My name is Clint Holly, and I will be your host as we take a stroll through my record collection and listen to some lost classics, new releases, and reissues all spun directly from the vinyl format. If you like radio where the DJ still picks out the music and tells you something about the artist, then this show's for you as I bring in stacks and stacks of vinyl records from the past and the present to spin for you, the listener. So tune in Thursdays, 4 p.m. on Radio Bristol. See you there.
Broadcasting from the birthplace of country music, this is WBCM LP Bristol.
Hello, everyone, and how are you tonight? Good, good. Well, come on in. Oh, it's Leah. Hello. Everyone, this is Leah. Hi, I am Renee Rogers, and I am the director here at the Birthplace of Country Music Museum, and I'm very glad to see all of you folks out tonight. We're really excited to have KT Vandyke here with us. He is an old friend of the museum. He has been doing many things with us over many, many years, so it's great to have him with us. I also just wanted to give a shout out to my colleague Tobias Gosfield in the back, who's making sure that all of the tech runs and gets it out onto YouTube for us. I've just realized, nope, there it is. I was like, I have half of Dom Flemons's bio and half of yours here, so we'll see what that turns out like. I do also want to thank the United Company Foundation for their support of our speaker sessions programming. They are helping to make it possible to bring such good folks to the museum for these sessions. And before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping details. First, if you do need to use the restroom, it's just down the hallway and on the left. If you need to leave before the end of the program, we will be locking the front doors in about 15 minutes, so they will not be open. So just be sure that you go out the side doors right here beside the Performance Theater if you need to leave early. A survey will be sent out afterwards. We always like to get your thoughts and your perspectives on what you've experienced here at the museum. It helps us to plan other programs. And there will be a chance to talk to KT and ask some questions once he finishes his presentation. So be sure and have some things to ask him. Finally, if you are able to, please consider giving a donation to the museum after tonight's program. If you're here with us in person, we have our donation jar here at the front. If you're with us on YouTube, there should be a link to the donation on our website in the comments. And the reason why that's so important is that we try and give our community and our audiences as many programs that are free or low cost, and to make them as accessible as possible, and those donations truly do help. But before we get into this presentation, I want to introduce tonight's speaker. And now, I need my glasses. Born and raised deep in the Black Diamond Hills of southwestern Virginia, KT Vandyke is a peculiar individual, and I can attest to that. But he is also an award-winning songsmith, multi-instrumentalist, and luthier who has devoted himself to the various crafts of music making. KT makes his home in Bristol, where he operates Frog Level Guitar Shop, the workshop where he apprenticed under master luthier Walter Skip Herman for 3 years before taking over ownership upon Herman's retirement in 2019. Over the last decade and a half, KT has garnered a laundry list of accomplishments and recognitions, gaining a reputation for his lyrical songwriting. Honors include first place in the Richard Lee Songwriting Festival and being a finalist in the Telluride Troubadour, Visit Music City, and Tennessee songwriting competitions. In 2022, Vandyke and Herman were recognized by the State of Virginia Department of Humanities for their work together, and the following year, Vandyke was awarded the Tradition Bearer Fellowship by the Greater Bristol Project, now known as the Bristol Roots Project. In 2025, Vandyke was the artist in residence at Bain Mabu. Say it again. There you go. Gaelic College in Mabu, Nova Scotia, Canada. KT is currently in production of the Migration Project, a collaborative project in partnership with Grammy-winning cellist and producer Dave Egger and Haunted Hollow Studios in Charlottesville, Virginia, which is slated for release late 2026. And I did get a sneak listen to one of those songs, and it's going to be well worth it. So let's welcome KT to the stage, and we'll get started.
So good evening, everybody, and hello. Thank you for being here. There's a lot of places you could be on this wonderfully, what should I say, terribly humid day. But I'm glad you're in the nice air-conditioned theater with me. So, yes, welcome. I am KT, and I'm a musician, a songwriter, and a luthier. And today we're going to dive into a little bit of that work. And but I think first and foremost, hey, there we go. So a little bit about myself. I come from a little place called Whitewood, Virginia. So Whitewood, Virginia is tucked away on, as I like to say, the tip of the boot of the state. A little place called Buchanan County. And we're real well known for coal mining, a little bit for natural gas, but mostly for coal. I am the first, my brother and I are the first in our family on either side to not pursue a career in the coal mines. We come from about 3 generations of coal miners on both sides, and we're very proud of that fact, but also very well aware of the privilege it is not to have to go into the mines to seek a career. But besides that, it's a wonderful place to call home. It's getting a little smaller than it used to be. But as far as what I do these days, so I'm a luthier, and Lutherie is a pretty broad umbrella term. Most of the time, luthiers are affiliated with instrument building, but I myself specialize in instrument restoration and maintenance. And that's really what gets me excited, and I enjoy it the most. I've been into it for going on about 9 or 10 years. I first got into it when I was at ETSU. I was a student at the Bluegrass Old Time Country Music program. Graduated in fall of 15. While I was there, I got to meet a fella named Will Parsons who allowed me to dip my toes in the water of instrument repair. And from there, once I graduated, I relocated to Abingdon, Virginia. I started working at a little music store called Front Row. And there I met my mentor, Skip Herman. And we'll get into a little bit more about him in a bit, but defining, more about Lutherie and just some little fun facts. We'll get all the statistics out of the way, and then we'll get into the story stuff. So, music is, to me, music is synonymous with language. It is communication. And we have been making music for as long as we know. The earliest musical instruments date back some 60,000 years, and that is a flute that goes back to the Paleolithic era. And that was the Dave Babe flute, if I'm pronouncing that right. I hope I am, at least. The earliest drum is actually an alligator skin drum that dates back to China around 5500 BC. And here's another one I'm going to try to pronounce. Trois Frères is the first stringed instrument that dates back some 13,000 to 13,000 BCE. And it was depicted in a cave painting in France. That's the French name. One pretty interesting thing is the harps and lyres So they appeared in one of the very first cities that we know of, which is in the Middle East, and they were the first examples of tuning machines being used to manipulate string tension for pitch. So, with aside from all the real primitive stuff, most of the instruments that we know and we affiliate with around here that a lot of luthiers work on, which is guitars, fiddles, banjos, mandolins. The earliest guitar dates back to about the 15th century, but the guitar that we know of today, which is the Spanish classical guitar, was modeled and, according to Yamaha, was codified by Antonio Torres Jurado in 1850. And he is kind of the godfather of the modern classical and just the modern steel string guitar as well. The things that he did was he lengthened the body. Before then, these instruments were relatively small, think lutes sort of thing, mandolins, that sort of deal. And he added structural integrity by using bracing on the inner chambers. And real quick, while I'm talking about bracing, it's a pretty important part of instruments. And over here I have two guitar tops. These are from Martin, and these are detailing the different bracing patterns that Martin uses for all their guitars. So at the ends, feel free to come up here and check these out. They're pretty interesting. There's 4 different bracing patterns that they use in their dreadnoughts, but they use a variety of others for different models of guitar, different sizes and whatnot. So real quick, the first electric guitar was built in 1932, and surprise, surprise, it wasn't Leo Fender or Les Paul that had anything to do with that. It was a couple guys named George Beauchamp and Adolf Rickenbacker. Think Rickenbacker guitars for those of you guitar nerds out there. The first design was actually a steel lap guitar model, and it's called the frying pan, which is pretty clever. First violins date back to, surprise, surprise, Italy. In Cremona with Andrea Amati, he is probably the most notable Italian violin luthier, aside from Antonio Stradivarius, which everybody knows, the infamous Stradivarius violins that cost millions upon millions of dollars. The oldest violin that we know of is Charles IX, which was commissioned by the King of France in 1560. It's the oldest living violin that we have. And of course, banjos were brought over in the 17th century and actually developed by enslaved Africans and Caribbeans. Were primarily made of gourds and animal skins. And of course, mandolins, to tie things up, were from the 17th century in Naples. So, digging into things real quick, we'll zoom back forward into future. So, our region is very synonymous with our music, old-time music, country music, bluegrass sort of thing. And we have various heroes in that music. Well, the Lutherie community is also very rich here, and it dates back many generations. But these are 2 of our most renowned Lutherie heroes, at least mine. Both of these 2 individuals played a part in me getting to where I am. Not so much directly with Albert Hash. This is Albert Hash here. And he was the founder of the White Top Mountain Band, string band. And he was a prodigy fiddler, and he also built some amazing instruments. So the connection between Albert and this is Wayne Henderson on your left. Everybody knows Wayne and his tremendous guitars. Albert knew Wayne. You know, they grew up relatively in the same area, and Albert had some influence on Wayne. So even though I've never met Albert, he influenced me in a roundabout way, but Wayne influenced me directly. I got to meet him at Merle Fest back in, I think, 14 or 15. And at that time, I was taking the Lutherie class under Will Parsons, and I asked him after a little performance, you know, hey, I'm interested in doing what you do. Any advice you can give me for somebody that's just starting out? And he told me to start by repairing instruments. Start there. It's real easy to want to jump headfirst into building, but if you repair enough instruments, you'll start to realize how they're made, how they're supposed to sound, how they're supposed to play. And by doing that, you know, you'll be able to build a more structurally sound, pleasant-sounding guitar. Since I've been doing this, there are a few different people who I owe a lot to. I'm sort of an example of somebody who is standing on the shoulders of giants, as they say. So Wayne and Albert both were an influence, but these four gentlemen have been a huge influence or even roundabout mentors to me over the past few years. Real quick, this is Doug Proper up here on the far left. He runs Guitar Specialist in New York and has helped me quite a bit and has taken a lot of his time away from his work and away from his shop to talk to me at length about certain issues that had me pulling my hair out. Same for Ian Davlin. He is the founder of Luth Group, which I'll talk a little bit more about. Real quick, Luth Group is an international collection or guild of luthiers. We span all across the world. I think there's like 1,400 of us now, give or take. The man in the far left corner is Frank Ford. Unfortunately, we lost Frank last year, if I'm not mistaken, and it was a huge loss. He was a giant in the industry and the community, and a lot of the techniques we use today and have used started with him and also started with this guy. This is Dan Earlywine. Some of you might know Dan from his affiliation with Stu Mack. These two guys are the definition of giants in the industry. They've done a lot for luthiers such as myself. At least two generations of luthiers have looked to these two guys for a lot of instruction, a lot of help, and a lot of resources. And they never let us down. So, the one person that I owe the most to probably would have to be this guy. And this is Walter Herman, or better known as Skip. And as I said, whenever I was relocating to Abingdon, working at Front Row Music, I got to meet Skip. And he came in one day and was picking up instruments, dropping stuff off. And I got to see some of his work, the before and after, and it was just so impressive to me. And it really caught me off guard because this was the first time I'd ever actually encountered what I would call a miracle worker. You know, this man could take things that were destined for the trash bin and give it second life. Not only that, you would never even know anything was wrong with it, which was truly impressive skill. I like to think that the more I've learned about Skip in my time with him, the more I've realized that he has lived multiple lifetimes in his one lifetime, or so it seems. He studied at Juilliard for a brief moment before enlisting in the Marines and going to fight in Vietnam. If I'm not mistaken, he did 2 tours. Skip, if you're watching, I'm sorry if I'm getting some of these details wrong. When he left Vietnam in 1969, he moved over to California. Before a couple of years later, he relocated back here to the area. He's originally from New York, up toward Utica. And he came here. He had family in the area, so he moved here. And this is kind of where the whole Lutherie journey began. These are pictures of a 1800s harp that he restored. Unfortunately, these pictures are a little further along. He's done a good bit of work in these, but they were some of the pictures I had of him actually hands-on diving in and doing the work. This harp is the Sebastian Aird's harp. and dates back to the early 1800s. And there is a 27-minute long step-by-step video on YouTube of him repairing this thing. If you have 30 minutes and you're interested in harp repair, I highly encourage you to check it out. It's incredible. It's a little slow, but it's incredible, the before and after that he was able to accomplish. There's the after. I wish I actually had some before pictures, but it truly is a beautiful thing, and I can promise you the before pictures are pretty rough. So there is one thing I really wanted to talk about today. When we're talking about the art of Lutherie, unless I have workbenches, a bunch of broken guitars, and a whole lot of tools, and you got a whole lot of time and patience, it's kind of hard to really dive into the nuts and bolts of Lutherie and what it is and how we do the things that we do. But we're going to get to a little bit of that, but I wanted to tell kind of the story of how I came to be here, because as I said, there's numerous players, numerous individuals that played a part in me being here to begin with. And Skip and I both owe a lot of thanks to this guy right here. This is Uncle Dave Sturgill. So he's quite an individual in his own right. He was a luthier, if I'm not mistaken, in Allegheny County, North Carolina, and he owned Skylark Instruments. And this ragtag bunch is some of his bandmates and a couple of his students. And real quick, pop quiz, this fella right here, so this is Skip. You can see him hidden back there. But this fella right here, does anybody have an idea who that individual might be? It is, in fact, Wayne Henderson. Yeah. So, yeah, they both got their start early on hanging out with Uncle Dave Sturgill. And what I never got the opportunity to meet him. But from what I've heard, he was sort of a larger-than-life individual in some regards. He loved music. He got his start during the Great Depression when he was traveling around with Burl Ives. And I think he was just kind of assisting. I think he's playing some music a little bit, but mostly just assisting with the tour and managing some stuff. After he left there, he got a job with, let me see here on my notes so I'm getting things right. So he got a job working for Bell Labs. And this is an important part of the story because this man contributed a part to a major invention that created our modern world. He was a part of the team who invented the transducer. So for those of you who don't know, transducer is a very, very important piece of electrical equipment. It essentially converts one type of energy into another. So think sound, vibration, anything that you can imagine goes from one form of energy into another. This man is in a small part responsible for that. So this is a little piece of, a little piece of paper that was provided with a dulcimer that somebody had bought from him. And you can see some of the things that, this is him, of course, and this is Skyland. I'm sorry, I said Skylark. It's Skyland Music Instruments. His little storefront. He built banjos, mandolins, and guitars, and I've heard that his banjos are quite sought after. I also find it quite funny that right in the dead center, he provided a map of how to get to his place, which is right here, Skyland, right beside the school and right down from Mouth of Wilson, which I'd say you take that road and you probably end up in Wayne's neighborhood. So, a little bit more about Dave before I get on to Skip. So whenever he left Bell Labs, he got a job working with Billy Grammer of Grammer Guitars. And he was not really the luthier for them, but the plant manager for a number of years. And when Grammar Guitars left, Ampeg bought the factory that they worked on, and they kept him on. So he played a big part for those companies early on. The plant eventually closed, which left him moving back to North Carolina, which is where he started Skyland Instruments. And thus leads us to this fella. So this is Skip Herman, as I know him and have known him in the last 10 years. Skip met Dave Sturgill and the crew around 72 when he was relocating to Abingdon. He would travel the weekends and go down and apprentice and study and perform with them for a number of years, and he did that for about 4 years every weekend. He would leave work here in Abingdon and drive down to North Carolina, hang out, be old repair, and then come back. In '86, Skip decided to start Frog Level Guitar Shop, which is the shop that I run. It is going on 40 years now, which is pretty crazy. And he did a number of really cool things in the industry while he was running that business. In the early 90s, he was a guitar buyer for Jackson Browne and Jorma Kaukonen. So everybody knows Jackson Browne, but those of you who are not familiar with Jorma Kaukonen, he Hot Tuna is probably one of the more present-day bands that he's affiliated with, but Jefferson Airplane was probably the biggest one. But yeah, so Skip, he's quite the individual. Whenever I met him, this guitar to the right, well, I need to use the mic, I guess. So this guitar to the right is pretty important to me because this was the first instrument that I laid eyes on that he repaired and really, went over and fixed. I'm sorry that I don't have an after picture of this. I did look quite strenuously, didn't have any luck. But it has a funny story to it. So this guitar belonged to an older fella. He gifted it to his grandson. Now this is I think it's like a 1961 60 B25 Gibson. It's wonderful shape. These little things were the only thing wrong with it. So he gives it to his grandson. The grandson really wants to play rock and roll. So what does he do? But he turns it into an electric guitar, drilling a tone and a volume knob hole in the top, cutting out the upper part of the sound hole to mount some humbuckers. And, of course, you have to have an input jack, so that was drilled into the side as well. When this guitar came back to the shop, I remember I was the one that received it that day, and I opened it up, really excited to see what was done, thinking that's, how is he going to replace this? But he ended up replacing the whole top. He found a really nice piece of, if I'm not mistaken, red spruce, and you could never tell. It was such an impressive job. I had no idea that anything had been done. After that, I started paying more attention whenever he'd come in, just trying to bug him, ask him any questions I could. He invited me over to the shop one day, and that even further added to my infatuation with his work. So I just started hanging around there as much as I could on the weekends and through the week. Well, mostly through the week. At that time, I was working on the road a good bit, running sound for various bluegrass bands. So I would come in through the week, work at the music store, squeeze off any time they needed me to run and drop him off something and stay far too long. Try to think of some excuse of why I was over there longer than 30 minutes. But yeah, it was quite a treat. He was incredibly patient and giving with his time, his expertise, and I owe him a lot. The one thing that, well, let me say this. The one thing that kind of seems a little bit as divine intervention was I was in a pretty unstable place in life at that time. was trying to figure things out. Was out of school a year maybe. Just relocated and got this job on the road, bouncing around a lot. He had been looking for an apprentice for a number of years, since, like, if I'm not mistaken, since the late 90s. And he expressed that it was really hard for him to find anybody. And real hard because he never found anybody. Several people were interested. They'd show up. But the amount of time, the amount of patience, money that it took to learn the trade, sufficient enough to be able to kind of take over what he was doing, which was some pretty heavy lifting jobs. It was quite a commitment. So he reluctantly, gave me the time of day, and as it says in the little caption, that I just kind of hung around like a fly on the wall as much as I could. And I bugged him as much as I could with just different dumb questions. Most of them I probably asked 2 or 3 times. But, a lot of the things he's told me has just kind of stuck with me throughout the years. I still hear whenever I'm in my shop and I'm working through things, I'll hit a problem or I'll get a little too comfortable. And it's as if I hear his voice in my head saying, slow down. Take your time. Don't rush. If you rush, it's going to take longer. Do it right the first time. Don't make mistakes. Because if you screw up, you got to unscrew up. And that takes a lot of time. So those are pretty time-tested lessons. And as we creep closer toward 2020 and COVID, we were recognized by the State of Virginia Humanities, or Department of Virginia Humanities, for apprenticeship grant. I think it was 2021 or 22, and it all kind of blurs together, unfortunately. But this is near the end of our apprenticeship, and something that's funny about this picture is if you look at that eye, it looks a little swollen. And before I get into why, I'll say this. So in my time on earth, I have realized that life will teach you most every lesson you need to know, by either providing people with experience, the mentors, or, trial and error, or just really screwing up and doing dumb stuff. I did something dumb. And that dumb thing was soldering without safety glasses on. So the day before this picture was taken, I was rewiring an electric guitar, went to clean my soldering iron off that had a little buildup on it, and that hot solder went right in my eye. I freaked out, of course, and went to the eye doctor. They did surgery on me. Fortunately, there was no damage that was permanent or affected my vision, except a pretty gnarly looking swollen eye in this picture. Needless to say, I always wear my safety glasses now. And you should too, if you do anything. Even if you weed eat, wear your safety glasses. You only have one set of eyes. So this was one of the last jobs that Skip did before he truly retired and stepped away. This is a 1800s Neapolitan-style mandolin. We like to call them round-backed potato bug. Does that sound right, Bailey? Okay, yeah, potato bugs, yeah. So it some severe damage here and an insanely tricky repair. This part of it right here, I guess I got my little pointer I can use. So this part right here, the top come off, and then it sloped down. And all of this was diagonal, coming off into the bowels of the instrument, which made it incredibly difficult to repair this. But he was able to do it. And as you can see here, too, you can see where the back is coming separated, and there were some pretty gnarly cracks there. But in true Skip fashion, he did a wonderful job. It played exceptionally, considering it was a very old instrument that had been through a lot. And it was a lot of fun. The owner was quite pleased. And this is one of my favorite pictures of him. This was taken near the end of our apprenticeship and really our time working together. This was probably in 21, right in the middle of COVID. So we were spending less and less time as COVID went on. But every once in a while, he would come up and hang out with me in the shop. And this is one of the last pictures I got of him in space. And it really was such a special place. These are some of the last pictures I took of the space before I started really moving everything out. It's very cluttered, but very cozy. And if you could ever put French windows and doors in your workspace, I highly encourage you to do it. It's fantastic. A little breezy, but very nice in the summer. So, yeah, I spent at least a good probably 4 years in this space. The latter half of those years was pretty much every day or most days. So yeah, it's a special place to me. It's now since renovated the shop, and it no longer is what it used to be, but it's now a full-time residence. This was his final project. So there's jobs and there's projects. This was his final project. This is a Brazilian rosewood and Adirondack spruce Martin D45. So he restored this. If I'm not mistaken, the back and sides are original, and I do not remember the year of those back and sides, but they're quite old. And by quite old, I mean we're looking around World War II era. He was able to get those and the neck, and he built the top. All the inlay work that he did was done by hand, and it's just exceptional. You can see some of the inlay work obviously on the neck and the headstock. He reached out to Martin and told them what he was doing, and they certified this instrument despite it not being produced at their factory. They certified it as an official Martin vintage instrument. And one thing I want to say about this inlay on the headstock was he did something really cool here. You don't ever really see colored inlay work. This is all mother of pearl and abalone, which is seashells if you're not familiar. So they only come in certain colors, and by certain colors it's mostly this. You might have a little teal, silvery shade to them, but having one uniform color like that doesn't exist. So this is incredibly hard to do, but he figured up a way to do it, and it turned out exceptional. So each one of these he colored by, if I'm not mistaken, he used like an artist's marker and did fine layers of color over the abalone, would finish over top of that, and I think he did that like 6 or 7, 8 times for each color, and built it up, and it just turned out wonderfully. It's one of my favorite pieces, just period. It's one of my favorite instruments, and it's quite heavy, but it sounds wonderfully. So in 22, I received another grant, which was a Tradition Bearers grant, and allowed me to officially purchase the business from Skip and move the operation to Bristol. This is a shot of the shop as it was getting finished. Still a little bit to go here, but you can see I'm thrilled with it and just so happy. The space was a decent bit bigger, I was able to expand my capabilities in a number of ways, and one major thing that I was able to upgrade was volume. So for luthiers, it's really, really hard to make a living in this business had you not been able to turn over quite a bit of volume. In that small shop, it was quite difficult. So on top of learning and having a slow pace period, this space was able to allow me to work on about 4 instruments at one time, which I'm a little sporadic-minded, so it works for me. You know, if I get bored here, I can go work on something else. One other thing that is worth mentioning here about this, and this is another shot of the shop. That's my pedestal, which is one of my main, I guess you could say, main tools, main fixtures that I use in the shop. And all of these little tools here, the pedestal you see here, the Gerstner box full of tools, all these little whatnots over here, these little files. The thing about Lutherie tools is they are insanely expensive. They're not cheap. You can get cheap tools, but they're cheap tools, and we all know about cheap tools. So there's one major barrier of entry to this work, and I would say it's probably the main reason why you don't have more young people entering the trade today, is because that, one, the tools are so expensive. If you apply any overhead to that, if you're renting a space, whatever it might be, utilities on top of that, it would take a few $1,000s if any of us were to start over from scratch. I mean, like, I want to be a full-service instrument repair shop. Full service is in if it walks through my door and it's a guitar, banjo, mandolin, a fiddle, or a banjo, that I can pretty much do what I need to do with it to fix it. It would take a few $1,000s just in tools. You're not counting the space. There's a lot of cost in this. So whenever I bought the business from Skip, it was, he made me a great deal and helped me out tremendously, and which is another reason I owe him so much. Is we got the grant, and I was able to pay him out of the grant to buy the business, and he gave me his tools, his jigs, his fixtures for a great price. Had that not happened, I probably wouldn't be doing this, in all honesty, because it's just so expensive. So now that I've kind of talked about the story of how I got where I am, I wanted to kind of dive into some of the work that I've done over the years. This was one of the last big job. Well, let me say this. This was the first big job that I ever really did. This was also one of the last jobs that Skip and I did together. The story behind this is it's a Steve Werner limited edition Takamine guitar. It's a very nice guitar. At least it was. The owner of this guitar, he had some damage to it. I think it got a crack in it, as you can see over here. A little bit of finish damage. A young fellow that he worked with did auto body repair and convinced him, he's like, I can repair this for you. Let me take a shot at it. The repair consisted of dousing the entire guitar in paint thinner, which, you know, all right, there's a lot of ways to skin a cat, folks, especially in this business. There's a variety of ways to do it, but in no reality is that the proper way to move forward with any instrument, really. That resulted in a lot of damage to the wood. The finish is gone. The rosette is gone. You have loose braces in here. Let me see. This is moving more along to the repair. So we decided we would give it a shot. We started by a lot of sanding, first and foremost. I do mean days worth of sanding. We had to fill in the electronics, which was non-functioning. So we patched that, which was surprisingly a very difficult thing to do. You think you're using a contoured side or shoulder of a guitar. The other real issue that we had was the rosette. So all of this was warped quite terribly, especially the sound hole in the rosette. So what we had to do was, Skip came up with this, and it's quite ingenious. So we strapped the guitar down and we made sure it was perfectly level. As you can see, we created a little dam on the inside with tape, and that's also binding. So it created a little dam, and we were able to take very thin epoxy. I'm sure somewhere out there there's a luthier going, oh God, no. But it worked. And sometimes you got to get creative, and this was one of those creative things. It worked quite well. And the finished result, quite proud of it. It took a lot of time, a lot of finishing. You can still see in the reflection on the front a little bit of the inconsistencies in the wood, and some things you just can't get out. You can't sand through a top. That would make it vastly worse, which would have been the result had we kept sanding to get it level. But there's another guitar here, and I'm not really sure if this, Clint, I'm not sure if this is one of yours or not. No. Okay, I had to ask. So this is a early 20th century Spanish guitar. It's a classical guitar, nylon string, and it had some pretty massive cracks. Let me get out of the way here. Sorry, folks, I'm standing right in your view. Had some pretty massive cracks right through here, and by massive, they were about a 64th of an inch wide, which is pretty wide considering, it's a guitar crack. Typically, if we have a crack in a guitar top or a guitar body, we'll use some kind of glue. My personal favorite's hide glue, protein glue, to just glue the seam up. It pulls the two pieces of wood together, as this little suction effect. But there's a variety of glues we used. Hide glue, tight bond wood glue is a very popular one. Super glue, believe it or not, as kind of having this moment right now. There's some exciting developments in the world of super glue, folks. I'm thrilled. I'm not kidding. That is not sarcasm at all. But this was one job that we couldn't really use any of those with because the crack was so wide. And whenever you have such an instance, you have to do what's called a spline. So a spline is a very advanced repair, and it's very frustrating. It's a very hard thing to do. So essentially what we have to do is we have to cut a thin sliver of spruce, and it needs to be a similar grain pattern to match. So we have to cut it in this little V shape like that, and we have to go in and widen that crack in a little V shape so it'll fit. And we need it to fit snug and tightly, but not too tight, just tight enough. So the real issue here is the clamping. It took probably a few days worth of brain power to come up with that, sadly. But it did work. It worked quite well. As essentially 2 business cards and 2 pieces of veneer stuck underneath a plexiglass caul that I made. And then, of course, we have our clamps here. So we had 2 cracks. You can see right here, this is the spline for the second one, and that's the crack that's been prepped. Right here is once it's actually inlaid in there. And once again, this is it being clamped. At the end, this is what it looked like once it was laid in. And once I'd taken my chisels and cut them flush. And this is the final result. pretty cool. You can still see like a little bit of artifact here, but I was really happy that this was almost completely gone. And just right in here was the only thing you could really see, which, what more could you ask for? So this one is the last one we'll show to you, and it's the most severe. I'm the most proud of this one because this was a catastrophe. Yes, actually it was. And not actually at a bar, but it involved alcohol and it involved fighting. So this is if my mind doesn't betray me, this is a 74 or 75 Martin D35. So the story behind this, the owner was hanging out with a friend of his one night, and they were having some drinks. They were having a few drinks. And they got a bit rowdy, and that turned into a little bit of a scuffle. And his friend shoved him. He fell back, and his head went through the top. So he was in really, really bad shape. And this was one of those conversations that he approached me about fixing it. I tried to talk him out of it. He insisted. I tried to talk him out of it still. And he insisted, saying, whatever you can do with it is better than what it is now. So I reluctantly accepted the job. There were weeks where I just had this thing on my bench, and I just stood and looked at it and was just in the pits of despair about what I had gotten myself into. But, baby steps. So what I had to do was, this is, you got my little plexiglass caul. These are little jigs that are used for clamping cracks and cleating. So there's a little wire. You can see right here, that is a tuning machine, for like any other guitar tuning machine. And there's a little slit in this wood right underneath that, and we run a wire through that. So underneath here, there's little cleats that we make. And we use little tools to make them. And you thread the wire through, and it anchors to the bottom of the top, and it keeps everything level, and it helps pull it flush. You clamp it with the top, and it keeps everything nice and straight and flush and even, which is exactly what we need. That was pretty much the method. Little, very, very little by little. I did that probably 10 or 11 times over a span of months. All the bracing was gone on the inside. It wasn't gone. It was in there, but it was loose. Was not attached to anything. And again, more clamping. You can see here getting sideways horizontal pressure to squeeze everything in. And right here is clamping the braces back together. So at the end, this is kind of what we're getting. Still some work down here that was left to be done on the binding. But this was a picture that the owner sent me, goofed around and didn't get the actual final product. So he was kind enough to shoot me a picture. And really proud of this one. It turned out great. It's still playing today. And last time I was over at his house, got to play it a little bit, and it actually sounds pretty good. So surprise, surprise. A lot better than it was. Speaking of such instruments, one of my favorite stories about broken instruments is the infamous Bill Monroe mandolin. At some point, and y'all too correct me at any point if I'm losing the facts here, but Bill, at the height of his fame, was sponsored by Gibson. He was playing the Lloyd Loar. I think it was a Lloyd Loar. And he had some extracurricular activities going on outside of his relationship. So while he was gone one day, his girlfriend found out about it and took a hatchet, if I'm not mistaken, to his mandolin and left it in pieces. So Bill got the mandolin, gathered up all the pieces, took it back to Gibson, and they pieced it together, shard by shard. And it's quite impressive. If you ever get a chance to see it, I think it's at the Nashville Country Music Museum, right? Yeah. It's pretty cool. But, you know, we're kind of winding down. This music has been such a kind thing to me. It's given me so much. Lutherie has allowed me to go and meet some of my best friends, some of my mentors and heroes that I've looked up to and only known online. I've been able to present twice at the Richmond Folk Festival, which was truly a treat. Through this, I was able to actually be in a movie, which was kind of cool. And again, meet some awesome people. A couple luthiers worth mentioning. This is Michael Brewer. He's a friend of mine from Marion. Yeah, and he's primarily a guitar builder. He does some guitar repair work, but he builds some wonderful guitars. This fella over here behind me in this picture is Mac Trainum. He's from Floyd, Virginia. He built some wonderful banjos and fiddles, and just a fantastically talented fella. The guy down here, this is Jackson Cunningham, a good friend of mine, and one of my favorite guitar builders in the world. He does some truly awesome stuff, paying homage to vintage Gibson instruments. And he does everything from fiddles to mandolins to arch top guitars to some fantastic steel string guitars. Last time I was over at his shop, he was building this beautiful maple arch top for Red Bull cart, which I think should be relatively close to being done. But kind of wrapping up things, as far as outside of Lutherie, I try to stay as active as I can in music. Been recently recording, as Renee mentioned in the intro, been recording an album project up in Charlottesville at Haunted Hollow Studios. And this is a picture of some truly amazing musicians and human beings that I got to work with throughout this year. That project we're hoping will be out, by fall sometime. And we'll play a little snippet of that if we have time. So this is the infamous Frog Level Guitar Shop sign that still hangs at the back of my shop. Skip, he made that, carved it out by hand, which is pretty impressive because that's a detailed guitar. And I'm also a very rarely contributing member of the Luth group. So Ian Davlin, one of the fellows I mentioned at the beginning of the program, he is a founder of Luth Group, and him and a few other guys and ladies got things up and going. This is, I want to say something about this because talking about the industry now and where we are, I think they have done single-handedly in developing this community, this resource. They have single-handedly done more to accelerate what we do, accelerate the evolution in how we repair, how we build. There's about 1,300 luthiers from around the world that contribute and are part of this community. Some of those are the biggest names in the business. Ian's one, Doug Proper being one, Dan Early one, Michael Bastian. All these guys are quite active on there, and they've done a lot to help me, so I want to give them a shout out, which is pretty cool. So thank you guys in the Luth group. And this is my dog, and I put this picture in here because I think he's awesome. That's Leuven. That is Leuven. So that is pretty much it for the presentation side of things. Yeah. So. Thank you.
All right, so that was a great presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm very glad Leuven was in there at the end.
Of
We love
course.
Leuven here and at the bookstore. He's a frequent visitor.
Indeed.
And he's actually been here at the museum for a length of time before to help you with one of your jobs.
This is true. Yeah, he typically makes appearances
Yes.
wherever I go.
So we have time for some questions. I do ask that you wait to get the microphone to ask your questions so we can be sure that the recording and the folks on YouTube can hear everything. But yeah, who has the first question for KT?
When did you know that you actually wanted to do this artistry? I mean, you didn't just wake up one day and, oh, I want to be a luthier. Did you have prior skills that led to this situation, or how did that work out?
So I would say that I had one prior skill that has served me very well in doing this work. And it's not woodworking or, blueprint reading or anything. It was just playing music. Being a multi-instrumentalist, having a lot of curiosity and wanting to learn a lot of different musical instruments, that's helped tremendously. And it harkens back to what Wayne said with knowing how an instrument is supposed to play, how it's supposed to sound, how it's supposed to feel. That's a huge part of things. As far as knowing, I don't think I ever really knew. I just kind of time went on and I just kept doing it, as strange as that might sound. So I was working on the road for a number of years leading up to COVID, and I was traveling with doing sound for Michael Cleveland, and I was running sound and stage directing at the Lincoln Theater in Marion. So when COVID hit, all of that dried up, and it just so happened I was spending time with Skip. It was the only way I knew how to make money at that time, and I would just get up most days and walk over to his house and his shop and just work the day away and then come back. I was making no money. I was making very little at that time, but I really enjoyed it. When I wasn't I worked by myself a good bit of that time through COVID, which is a great thing because I was cussing loudly a lot through that time with just figuring things out. But yeah, I will say that, post-COVID, things picked up and I started to kind of see a light at the end of the tunnel, at least a trajectory for the future. And again, had it not been for Skip, that never would have been a thing. Never would have had the opportunity or chance. And it's worth mentioning, too, that without the support of my wonderful family and my great wife, it wouldn't have happened either. Because again, through a lot of this time, I wasn't making much money. It was very fulfilling work, but and it still is today, it's a pretty consistent hustle. I have to be in the shop. I have to have time at my bench chipping away. And, the great thing is every job is relatively different, which keeps it refreshing.
Your wife has a question.
Oh.
Going back to what Renee said at the beginning of this, what makes you a peculiar individual?
You should know more than anybody what makes me peculiar.
Well, no, a real question. Two things. Can you talk about the Luth group, how you interact with them kind of on a regular basis? Because I know they do live streaming. And then second, tell us about, you're really interested in repair work, but you have done some building. So tell us about that experience and what you have on stage.
Thank you. So yeah, the Luth group. One really cool thing about the Luth group is that there's something called the Luth Along. So it's this massive archive of blueprints and how-to resources and all this stuff, forums to ask questions. But one of the real great things about it is the Luth Along. And as luthiers, we spend a lot of time by ourselves in our shop. And this is just a online Zoom room that's open 24 hours a day to Luth group members. You can log on there and you can shoot the bull with anybody. I've got friends in Mexico City, in Italy, in Wales, in Ireland, in Scotland, Turkey, that I hang out with on there and talk to a good bit. And of course, all around the U.S., there's a lot of American luthiers on there as well. So it's a wonderful resource and really, really great. I owe it a lot. But as far as some of the other things, and I guess I can kind of take this moment to look at my show and tell stuff. So this guitar here was my first build. So it's a little triple O. It's a red spruce mahogany triple O. It's kind of an HD, which, has the herringbone inlay. Or not, that's not inlay, it's purfling. But I wish I could strum and play you a song, but unfortunately it still needs a little bit of work. It needs a fret level. So you would be woefully disappointed if I was to string it up and start chugging something. So really proud of that one. That I did that at the Henderson with a friend of mine and some of his compatriots, Spencer Strickland. They do a awesome guitar building workshop there throughout the year. So if you're interested in ever building a guitar and you want to walk away with something that's actually playable, check them out. They do great work. So this right here, this is a 1971 Martin D35 that I've been doing some work on. So this needed a neck reset, and I brought this so you can kind of see, and feel free to walk up after this is over and take a closer look. You can kind of see how we pull the neck and how we do a neck reset. So whenever we do this, we have to pull around the 15th fret out, and we take these, what's called heat sticks, and we drill these two little holes. Maybe you can see the burn marks. Yeah, you can see it kind of right here where the drill went down. And we put these little probes in, and it gets it really hot, and it weakens the glue. And just over a lot of time and work, sometimes I've had neck resets. That is a neck reset, by the way. I've had neck resets take 2 weeks just to get the neck off, and that's daily, adding heat to it and just like jerking and wiggling it around, and it's not doing anything. Thankfully, Martins are pretty great whenever it comes to neck resets. For the most part, this one took like an hour, which is wonderful. It came off great. Whenever you look at this, something that's worth noting and looking at is this is the tenon of the joint. So this is a dovetail joint. This is the tenon, and it's called the mortise. So on the tenon, the joint fit loose, so what I had to do was shim this dovetail, and it's a pretty tricky thing to do. When you look at it, you can see how literally down toward the bottom of the tenon, it's like paper thin, and it just takes a lot of time to get it there. But that's what it takes to get a really good fitting joint. And last but not least, at least for this whole thing, the show and tell portion. This is one of my favorite stories that came to my shop, and it's unfortunate. This is a Taylor 110, 114, and it has certainly seen better days. The headstocks broke right here. You can see the body. Believe it or not, that's probably the worst thing on this, is that side crack. That side crack is ridiculously hard to repair.
Do you have to take it off, or can you repair it in situ?
If I was going to repair this, it would probably, to do a really good job, I would have to take the top off and replace the top, which the guy didn't want to. So the story on this was the fella, he's from Maine, and he had just relocated He had just relocated here. And he didn't tell his longtime girlfriend that he was leaving until the day before. So he breaks the news. She's clearly upset, and rightfully so, and decides to do her best Pete Townsend impersonation on it, and does a pretty good job. So that's, yeah. Domestic issues make for some pretty interesting repairs. He could probably write a book. So, yeah, any other questions?
What are some of the best woods for, well, guitars, other instruments? I would guess that certain woods would help produce a sound that an artist would like. Could you expound on that?
Certainly. Yeah, so traditionally speaking, we're looking at hardwoods for what we call tone woods, which are just hardwoods that behave, in a preferable way when vibrations applied to them. Most notable is Brazilian rosewood. Rosewoods in general, so you got Indian rosewood and Brazilian rosewood, and I guess our rosewood, there's all sorts of rosewoods. They are all highly sought after, and that's one reason why all these old Martins and Gibsons, all these older vintage guitars are so sought after, mainly, even though some of them are pretty poorly built and designed. It's the woods, despite the craftsmanship, which leaves some to be desired, depending on the year and who made it. The woods make up for it somehow. It's baffling. So all of those woods are very hard to come across now. You can't really find. You can still buy the stuff. You can buy rosewood. I found a set of. So you have the grading tier on tone woods. You have single A to like 5A, and I think there's something above 5A. 5A and above being like top tier wood. It makes the best instruments, and single A it's still tone wood, but it has some deficiencies. It has some knots or whatever in it. The grain pattern might not be as pretty or whatever. So a lot of mahoganies are used, ebonies are used. Ebonies are primarily used for the fingerboard. Fingerboards right here is mostly mahogany. On your lighter woods, you have cherry and maple. Those are mostly for electric guitars. The necks are mostly made out of mahogany and a lot of sought-after acoustics. But the tops are softwood, so tops are typically cedar or spruce, various types of spruce. Adirondack and red spruce are traditionally like the most sought-after softwoods for tops. And there are situations where you'd use a hardwood for a top. One of the most common ones is the D16Ms, which is a Martin, all mahogany guitar, and they kind of have this like warm, quiet quality to them, and they're quiet. And this is a little bit of I'm sorry if I'm rambling on this, but this top acts like a speaker. So think a speaker cone, and that's the center of the speaker. So that outside is flexing and in movement whenever there's vibration being sent through it. And harder woods just don't vibrate as well. So the key whenever you're building a top is to get a really good piece of wood and to get it as thin as you can without compromising the structural integrity of it, which will lead to a host of problems. It can lead to belling, which is when this area down here develops a big hump, your bridge comes off. It's a pretty common problem. A lot of cracks can appear, a whole host of issues. But some of those pre-war martins that everybody like wants and is after, especially in the bluegrass world, one of the things that's about them that makes them so preferable is they found a way to get those tops thin, and they just boom. So, yeah, that is a whole realm in itself, is wood selection and type of wood. Cocobolo is another really pretty wood that's kind of becoming a rarity and being used more. It's very pretty, but it's has some issues when you work with it. And when you get into exotic woods, it's a whole new ball game. And how they behave in their finish, how they behave when you're cutting them, when you're doing inlay, whatever. I mean, it's a whole new ball game. But yeah, hope that answered the question.
Any other questions?
KT, modern technology, would you say the more modern produced guitars or manufactured guitars might be the same or better than more vintage, a modern Alvarez versus an older Martin?
So this is kind of up for debate, and it depends on who you ask. My opinion is yes. On average, modern instruments are substantially better than vintage instruments. Everything from probably like the early mid-60s back, you had a level of craftsmanship that didn't really come back around through like the 70s and 80s. And Clint, you probably know a little bit more about this than I do, honestly, with like the factories and who was doing what. Yeah, the level of how well we've gotten with working with CNC is baffling. What used to be cheap stuff coming out of China that nobody wanted to touch, Eastman Guitars is made in China. Bourgeois Guitars, which is a very high-end American brand boutique guitar. I mean, these are like $5, $6, $7, $8 grand and up guitars. Dana Bourgeois officially moved his whole operation to China. And he actually did a talk about it on the Lutherie group one time, talking about, him going over there and setting this whole thing up. And he just spoke about how really impressed he was with the level of workmanship they was able to do. So you have cheap labor and you have technology aiding that. The only thing you don't have with modern instruments is materials. So if you was able to take those traditional antiquated rosewoods from like the 30s, 40s, 50s, and use modern methods and direction to put those together. Everything from like sounding the top. Some of y'all have probably seen like Wayne Henderson do a top sounding. So I can demonstrate real quick how that's done. So imagine that this is just the top of the guitar. So if you ever see Wayne do this, he'll typically hold the top up here and he'll dangle it. And he'll tap around. And he'll just kind of explore and take note of he'll kind of explore and take note of the differences in the sound quality, depending on where he's tapping it and whatnot. That is an art in itself, and it is a very difficult thing to do, because even doing that, once you put that instrument together, there's still a mystery on how it's going to turn out and how it's going to sound. These days, there is a fella out of, if I'm not mistaken, he's out of Italy. I'm sorry, I can't remember his last name, Nicoletti. He's a contributing member to the Duluth group, and he has been lately doing a lot of talks on sounding tops and using technology to do this. So now they have ways to sound tops and alter the bracing pattern and anything they want, well, not the pattern, but alter the bracing dimensions while strings are on the guitar, while the guitar is fully built at any point in time, really. And how they do that is he would take that top and he'd put it on his workbench, and he would take some shavings. It could be sand, it could be sawdust, whatever. And he's going to take a speaker and he's going to hold it over, and he's going to run various different frequencies through that speaker and project it onto that top. It's really cool because you'll get all these different patterns depending on what frequency you're using. And he can read those patterns, and he can also use a little measurement device inside the guitar that will allow him to see the harmonic frequencies that happen. So you have, if you're looking at a frequency spectrum, right, you have like low note down here, really high note up here. If you're playing an E note on a guitar, so you're going to get this E down here, and you're going to see it represented on the frequency spectrum. But you'll also notice that while this E is happening, and you're hearing it, that you also have these other little spikes happening in different frequencies on up the spectrum. You're not really hearing them. You can, but by dialing in on those and adjusting those are called polar patterns. You're able to, that's not quite right, but you're able to manipulate the sound, and it's able to give you real-time feedback about what your guitar's actually going to sound like, where it's going to be most prominent in its frequency spectrum. So to kind of like circle back, a friend of mine in Washington has started, he was saying on the Lutherie group the other day that he was telling everybody, this might get me in a little bit of trouble too, but he was telling some of his customers who were into guitars, and they were buying kind of upper end Gibsons, Martins, so they were spending over $1,000 to $2,000 on newer instruments, and they were finding that these instruments were having issues. Martin, from the 2000s on, has had a terrible issue with binding coming off, and I see it all the time. It took them until the last couple years to finally admit that this was happening. If I'm not mistaken, the CEO did so in a big shareholder meeting, which was good to hear. So you had that. You had other issues with bad bracing, neck angles being off, frets being loose, not being level, which results in a lot of buzzing, whole host of issues. Poorly set truss rods, the list goes on. And these were in nice, expensive instruments. You know, people are spending over $1,500 for these. And my friend has resorted to telling anybody who asks him about, you know, what kind of guitar should I get? He has told them to go buy a $600, $700, $800 guitar. If you're wanting something that plays well, and bring it to a luthier, get them to dial it in, and you're set. You have something that's really well built on a CNC machine. All the joints fit together very well, and it performs great. And with a little tweaking here and there, a couple replacements and alterations, upgrades, you can have a really great playing instrument. So that alone, having a conversation about him really kind of solidified my opinion that modern instruments are pretty great. Yeah.
Well, I have a final question.
Certainly.
Which is frog level. Why is that
Yes.
the name of the workshop?
Okay, so most people, since I've been affiliated with that name, Skip came up with the name, and it's actually named after a small neighborhood off Stone Mill Road in Abingdon. It's where he lived, and but most people think it's the yacht club. Is anybody familiar with the yacht club? I know y'all up in the corner are. In Tazewell, Virginia, there was what's called the Frog Level Yacht Club. And it's really funny because Tazewell's a landlocked county in Virginia. And they had these T-shirts, and you could go whenever I was growing up. It'd be funny because you'd go to some random place. You'd be at the beach or in Georgia, and you would see a Frog Level Yacht Club T-shirt. So I've been after one of those T-shirts. If anybody has one and is getting rid of it, or you come across one, holler at me because I want one. But there's also Frog Level Guitars in Wilkesboro who builds guitars, and I get calls from them too. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's put our hands together and thank KT again.
Thank you.
It's been a wonderful talk about the art of Lutherie and music and all the other things in between. Thank you for your questions. Those were awesome. Before we go, and of course you can come up and have a chat with KT before you leave, have a look at his instruments. But let me just tell you about a few of the things happening at the museum over the next few weeks. Our next speaker sessions is on Tuesday, July 14th at 7 p.m. We have Nicholas Edward Williams on roots music. That'll be in person and on YouTube. So be sure and put that on your calendars now. Through Friday, June 12th of this week, at 2 p.m. every day at 2 p.m. we have free screenings from the Smithsonian Channel. This month we have She the People Votes for Women, and in July we're going to have A Star-Spangled Story, The Battle for America, with the very first screening happening on July 4th, so that's appropriate. These are all free screenings that we get through our Smithsonian affiliation to mark the 250th anniversary, and each month through the end of the year we will have a different Smithsonian Channel documentary screening once a week for the first Saturday to Friday of the month. And then finally, on Saturday, June 20th at 10 a.m., we have our museum volunteer orientation. So if you are interested in becoming a museum volunteer, that is a great way to find out how you do so and what types of jobs that you can help us with. But again, thank you so much for coming out. Thank you again to KT for a really wonderful presentation. We're glad to have had you here.